Okay, Rabbi Saya, guten Moed. Today's daf is complex, and it involves abstract concepts. So we'll try to get through it as best as we can. What we're talking about is, even though today is Sukkot, we're going to talk about Shavuos today, and the special sacrificial order of the Kivsei Atzeres and the Shtei Halechem. Now, the Kivsei Atzeres, you have to take 2 sheep, slaughter them, sprinkle their dam, and accompanying the Kivsei Atzeres are the Shtei Halechem, the 2 loaves of bread that are waved over the Mizbeach. As we're going to see, and as the Gemara has discussed already, the 2 are actually intertwined. And as the Gemara had said in yesterday's daf on Daf Mem Vav, Rabbi Yochanan had made a statement that even though the interdependency between the 2 is tentative, but everyone agrees that if I have the Shtei Halechem and I shechted the Kivsei Atzeres and then I lost the Shtei Halechem, so then everything has got to be started all over again. In other words, the 2 are very much interdependent of each other. So Tanu Rabbanan, Kivsei Atzeres ein mekachim es halechem ela b'shchita. And so the concept that we're dealing with today is the sanctification of the bread. Now, it's important to note that there are different levels of sanctification, and this is where it becomes abstract and somewhat complex. There are different levels of sanctification. We've already talked about many times in Shas about the difference between Kedushas Damim and Kedushas Haguf. Once again, the difference between Kedushas Damim and Kedushas Haguf. What's the difference? Kedushas Haguf means that there's something intrinsically holy, and that intrinsic holiness can never be removed, even through pidyon, even through redemption. Once it's holy, it remains holy permanently. There's something called Kedushas Damim, where it has financial Kedusha, which is not as inherent within the object as Kedushas Haguf. And so therefore it can be removed with pidyon. And theoretically, something which only has Kedushas Damim can have its Kedusha removed entirely to the point where it becomes chulin. Okay? So the question now is like this. We know that the Shtei Halechem, once they've been designated for temple service, have Kedushas Damim. At what point do they acquire their Kedushas Haguf? So the Gemara says it's b'shchita. It's at the time when you shech the Kivsei Atzeres, that's when the Shtei Halechem require their Kedushas Haguf. Keitzad, let's illustrate. Shachtan lishman v'zarak daman lishman, kadash halechem. Shachtan shelo lishman v'zarak daman shelo lishman, lo kadash halechem. So, if you did everything correctly, you did the shchita and the zrika correctly, lishem kivsei atzeres, so then the bread has become sanctified with kedushas haguf. If you did not do the shchita or the zrika correctly, then it acquires no intrinsic kedushas haguf. But what about shachtan lishman v'zarak daman shelo lishman? Halechem kadosh ve'eno kadosh divrei Rebbe. But let's say you only did the shchita lishma, but the zrika was done shelo lishma, was not done for the sake of kivsei atzeres. Let's say you did it for the sake of astama shlomim. So then in that situation, it's holy and it's not holy. Now what does that even mean? We don't even know what that means. So we're going to have to explain it shortly. That's according to Rebbe. But Rabbi Lazar Reb Shimon Omer, La'olam eno kadosh ad sheyishchot lishman v'yizrok daman lishman. And Rabbi Lazar Reb Shimon says, nothing doing. You have to do both the shchita and the zrika lishma, and if either of them is missing lishma, so then the bread is not sanctified. Not like Rebbe, who says that if the shchita was done correctly and the zrika was done incorrectly, it's halfway, or sort of kadosh and not kadosh. Rabbi Lazar Reb Shimon says it's not kadosh at all. Now, my time at the Rebbe. So what's Rebbe's reasoning, who says that the shchita is the pivotal issue? Dirsiv ve'es ha'ayil ya'aseh zevach shalamim l'Hashem al sal hamatzos. Lememra de shchita mekadsha. He says, let's look at a pasuk regarding the Nazir's sacrifice. The Nazir sacrifice also involves a grouping of bread. He has to bring his ram together with a basket of matzah. And so there the Torah says, it uses specifically the word zevach shalomim. Why does it have to use the word zevach? Zevach means the slaughter. This implies that the slaughter is the pivotal issue which causes there to be an inhering of Kedushas Haguf into the bread. And therefore, even though you did the Zrika Shelo Lishma, there still is at least some Kedusha that inheres in the bread. That's what we learned from Nazir. V'Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon Yaseh ad sheyaseh kol asiyosav. And Rabbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon looks at the very same pasuk and he says it doesn't just say the word zevach, it says yaseh as well. So that implies, yes, shchita is pivotal, but so too is something else that must be done to the carbon. That's what yaseh means. You have to do something else to it. And therefore you need both shchita and zrika in order for the kedusha to inhere in the bread. V'Rebbi nami haksiv yaseh. So what does Rebbe do with that word yaseh? So he says, iksiv zevach yaseh kideka amart. Hashad iksiv yaseh zevach bameh yaseh bizvicha. So Rebbe says, but look at the order. It says the word yaseh before it says zevach in the pasuk. So that can't be referring to zrika, which always comes after shchita. Nothing comes before shchita in the sacrificial order. And so therefore yaseh can't be adding another stage of the sacrificial order to the shchita. But rather it must simply just be telling you, how do you accomplish the sanctification process? Through shchita. Now, v'Rebbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon, haksiv zevach. So now the question is, according to Rebbi Elazar b'Reb Shimon, you have to do the whole process throughout, from shchita through zrika, lishma, in order to sanctify the bread. Why then does the pasuk by Nazir single out shchita by saying the word zevach? So the Gemara answers, Hahu mi boy leilichid Rabbi Yochanan, do amar Rabbi Yochanan hakol modim shetzarech sheyeh lechem b'sha'as shechita. The answer is that you need it for a separate halacha, which is to teach you that in order for the bread to be sanctified, it must at least be existent at the time when you do the shechita. While it's true that in order for it to be sanctified, you have to have a shechita and a zrika lishma, but the bread has to be at least existent at the time of shechita. You can't bake it after you do the shechita in order for the bread to be sanctified. That's what the word zevach teaches me by Nazir. Now, my kadosh ve'eno kadosh. So let's go back to Rebbe. Rebbe, what did you mean to say that if I did the shechita lishma but I did the zrika shelo lishma, it's kadosh ve'eno kadosh? It's holy and it's not holy. Well, what does that mean? It's like you can't be halfway pregnant. How are you halfway kadosh, right? What does it mean? Right? So the Gemara says, Abaya Omar kadosh ve'eno gamor, Rava Omar kadosh ve'eno nitar. So Abaya says it's holy but it's not completed, which again doesn't have any, we don't know what that means. And Rava says it's holy but it's not permitted, meaning permitted for consumption to the Kohanim. So let's see what the difference between the two of them is. My beinayu, or it's not permitted, or it's not alleviated of its kedusha. So the question is, what is the difference between the two? My beinayu, ika beinayu lemitvas pidyon. The difference is it subject to pidyon at all? So la abaya tafis pidyono, la rava lo tafis pidyono. That's the girsa of Rashi. Rashi changes the girsa. He works with the girsa in front of us initially, and then he says, no, it's wrong, you got to change it. So according to Abaya tafis pidyono, Abaya learns that according to Rava, yes, there is some level of kedushas haguf that inheres in the bread. However, it's not complete. And therefore, even though normally something that has kedushas haguf is not subject to pidyon, such that if I take coins and I say I want the kedusha to be transferred on the coins, if this object has kedushas haguf, my statement is completely meaningless. But over here, the statement has substance, such that I haven't totally removed the kedusha off of the bread, but I have transferred some kedusha onto the coins. That's what Abaya says would have. That's what the ramification would be over here. And according to Rava, no, the bread is not allowed to be consumed by the Kohanim, even though it has kedushas haguf. Why? Because the zevach was done shelo lishma. However, it has so much kedushas haguf that if I try to do pidyon, it's completely ineffective, it's null and void. And that would be the difference between Abaya and Rava. According to Abaya, the coins would acquire kedusha, and according to Rava, the coins would not acquire any kedusha at all because the bread has complete kedusha saguf. It's just that it's eno kadosh in the sense that normally when bread, the shtei halechem, acquires its kedusha saguf, the kohanim can then eat the bread once the korban is brought. But in this case, since the kibsei atzeres, the zrika was done shelo lishma, the kohanim are not allowed to eat the bread. So the Gemara now says, Bishlam l'Rava hainu di'ika bein Rebbe l'Reb Elazar b'Reb Shimon. Elul Abaya ma'ika bein Rebbe l'Reb Elazar b'Reb Shimon. So the Gemara now says, now Rava makes sense. If you learn Rebbe like Rava, then certainly I can understand what the machlokus between Reb Elazar b'Reb Shimon and Rebbe is. According to Rebbe, if you try to do pigeon with coins, it's completely ineffective, it doesn't work. And according to Reb Elazar b'Reb Shimon, since the bread only has kedushas damim until you do a correct zrika, and you didn't do a correct zrika, so there's only kedushas damim that lingers in the bread, therefore it is subject to pidyon. So I clearly understand the machlokas between Rebbe and Reb Elazar b'Reb Shimon according to Rava. But according to Abaye, if both of them hold that the bread has some aspect of pidyon that it is subject to, then what are they really arguing about? Both of them would say that if I try to do pidyon, the pidyon works. So what's the difference? Ika beinayhu li'ifsule biyotze. The answer is, what would be the halacha if after I do the shchita, I went ahead and I took the bread outside of the temple? That would be the machlokas. According to Rebbe, since the shchita is the pivotal moment that causes kedushas haguf to inhere in the bread, if I take something that has kedushas haguf and I remove it from the temple, I have pasuled it. And therefore, it is totally pasul and is no longer usable. But according to Reb Elazar b'Reb Shimon, since after doing shchita before I do zrika, it still only has kedushas damim, if I take it out the bread outside the temple, I have not pasuled the bread. Okay. Ba'aminei Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak me Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Kivsei atzeres sheshachtan lishman v'zark damin shelo lishman oso halechem mahu ba'achila. The question that is now raised is, if I do the shchita lishma and I do the zrika shelo lishma, will the bread be edible to the kohanim? Now, this question doesn't seem to make any sense. We've just established that both according to Rebbe and according to Reb Elazar b'Reb Shimon, if I conclude the shchita and the zrika, and I do the shchita lishma, and I do the zrika shelo lishma, then according to Reb Elazar b'Reb Shimon, you need to have both actions done lishma in order for the bread to be usable for the kohanim. And according to Rebbe, even though the pivotal action is shchita, but it's still kadosh ve'eno kadosh, which we explained that what it means is that it's still not edible to the kohanim. So ali b'daman. So the question therefore is, I don't understand, according to whom are you asking this question? I ali b'de Reb Elazar b'Reb Shimon ha'amar zrika hi demekadsha. According to Reb Shimon, zrika is as crucial as shchita in order for this bread to acquire its kedushas haguf and thereby to be permitted to the kohanim. And it didn't have that correct protocol done to it, to the kivsei atzeres, and therefore the bread will never be permitted to the kohanim. Ialiba de Rebbe, and if you're asking this question according to Rebbe, so then bein la Abaya, bein la Rava, kadosh ve'eno nitaru. Both according to Abaya and Rava, the bread is sanctified to some degree, and the only machlokus is whether pidyon works on it or not, but everyone agrees that it's not permitted for eating to the kohen. So I don't understand why you're even asking this question. It should be obvious that the shtei halechem will never be permitted to the kohanim if the zrika was done shelo lishma. So the Gemara answers, Ella aliba dahaitana. My question is not according to Rebbe, not according to Rebbe Elazar b'Reb Shimon, but according to a third Tana. And who is this Tana? As we'll see, it's Rebbe Akiva. We'll see in just a second. The Tani avua de Rebbe Yirmiyah bar Abba, shtei halechem sheyatzu, ben shchita lizrika, v'zarak daman shel kivasim chutz lizmana. Look at the following Brisa scenario. The Brisa describes as follows. You have the shtei halechem, okay, so you went ahead and you shechted the kibsei atzeres correctly, and then before you did the zrika, you took the shtei halechem and you removed them from the temple. And then you did the zrika with a machshava of pigel. Okay, so I told you this was complex, right? It's complex in its abstracts, which is what makes it so difficult. So just try to follow as best as you can. So again, you did the shchita lishma. You then took the shtei halechem outside the temple, and then you did the zrika with a machshava of pigel. The question is, is the bread, we know that the bread is in some way stigmatized. But is it stigmatized with pigul, such that if I were to partake of it, I would be subject to kares? Or is the stigma of pigul only applied to the flesh of the sheep, but not to the bread because it was outside the temple at the time? So Rabbi Eliezer Omer ein balechem mishum pigul, and Rabbi Akiva Omer yesh balechem mishum pigul. So machlokas Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer says no, it's not subject to pigul because the bread is detached from the meat, and therefore it is not subject to the stigma of pigul. But Rabbi Akiva seems to say that the bread, regardless of where it is considered to be an extension of the meat of the sheep. And therefore, it is still subject to pigul. If I had a machshava of pigul for the zrika, then regardless of where the bread is an extension of the meat of this animal, and therefore it too is stigmatized with pigul.
You don't have to have the machshava from the time of shechita?
No, no.
Even for zrika.
Right, even for zrika. But we'll see, the Gemara is going to qualify, the Gemara is going to question that. But anyway, at this point, at any stage of the avoda, if you have a machshav of pigul, it ruins the korban. Va'amar Rav Sheshes, hani tanoi karebi svirlahu, da'amar shchita mekadsha. So Rav Sheshes explains that the reason why this is an issue is because both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva go according to Rebbe, who states that as soon as the shchita is done, the bread acquires kedushas haguf, and therefore removing the bread from the temple passels the bread. Mihu Rabbi Eliezer l'taimei do'amar ein zrika mo'eles liyotze, v'Rebbi Akiva l'taimei do'amar zrika mo'eles liyotze. And Rabbi Eliezer holds that zrika, what the zrika that you do, only stigmatizes the objects that are inside the temple, but does not stigmatize the things that are outside the temple. And Rabbi Akiva holds that the zrika that you do stigmatizes even those portions of the animal that are outside the temple, and therefore by extension would stigmatize the bread as well. Ditnan, and we have the Mishnah that talks about the parts, the animal parts that leave the temple. Emurei kodshim kalam shiyatsu lifnei zrikas damin. If you have the innards, which are meant for the mizbeach, and after you shech the animal, you take the innards, you take the intestines and you remove them from the temple before you do zrika. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer ein moalin bahen ve'ein chayavan alem mishum pigul v'no sarvitami. So Rabbi Eliezer says, listen, it's only at the point of zrika that the emurim acquire kedusha saguf when it comes to kodshim kalim. And since they're outside the temple at the time of the zrika, they're not subject to me'ilah. And if you have a machshav of pigul at the time of zrika, the emurim are not affected by that either. And Rabbi Akiva Omer mo'alin bahen v'chayavan aleim mishum pigul v'no sarvitame. And Rabbi Akiva says no. Just because the emurim are outside does not mean that they're disconnected entirely from what's going on with the rest of the animal inside the temple. And therefore, the Gemara's assumption is, according to Rabbi Akiva, we see that the bread is viewed as an extension of the animal. Not like Rebbe and Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, but he says if the bread is an extension of the animal's body, we know that there's a halacha that midizrikas pigul kaval alechem bepigul beyotze kebasar. So therefore, our question is like this. A zrika that is done with a machshava of pigul will stigmatize not only the emurim that are outside, but also the bread that is outside, according to Rabbi Akiva. So we see, therefore, that it's just like the meat of the animal itself. So zrika shelo lishma nami sharya leilalechem odilma lechumra amrina lekulalo amrina. And therefore, our argument is like this. If I were to take a korban, and I were to do the shchita lishma, but the zrika shelo lishma, the halacha is that the meat is still permitted for consumption to the kohanim. And so therefore the question is, why don't we say in the same vein, no pun intended, that the bread, that according to Rabbi Akiva, is viewed as an extension of the animal, is like just like the meat of the animal. Granted, according to Rebbe and Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, if there was anything malformed about the kibsei atzeres, either at the shchita or the zrika, the kohanim will never be allowed to eat the bread. But according to Rabbi Akiva, it's clear that the bread is an extension of the animal's body, and therefore, if the meat will be consumable to the kohanim, why don't we say that the bread, according to Rabbi Akiva, is consumable to the kohanim as well? And therefore, that gives rise to our question: According to Rabbi Akiva, will the Kohanim be allowed to eat the bread as we think he would paskin in this situation? So maskif lo Rav Papa umimai dechi, or maybe the argument, the counter argument to that is, maybe we are only machmir to call the bread an extension of the meat. That just like the meat is subject to pigul, the bread is stigmatizable, right, for pigul as well. But maybe lakula, to say that the bread is an extension of the animal's body to allow you to eat the bread, maybe even Rabbi Akiva would say that we're not makel in that respect. So that's what gives rise to our question. So maskef lo Rav Papa umimai dechi isnuhu avroi pligi dilmabu b'de isnuhu avroi dekuli amalo pligi de ein zrika mo'eles liyotze uvahadar ailinu pligi. So the question that he raises is like this. Rav Papa raises the following question. Maybe you've totally misunderstood the machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. Maybe their machlokas is not when a piece of meat or some bread from the korban is outside the temple. Maybe everyone agrees that while it's outside, if there's a machshava of pigul or something else that taints the korban, the bread is not affected by that. The question that they're asking over here is that what if you take the bread outside after shechita and then bring it back inside before you do the zrika? Maybe that's the question, and they're arguing the machlokas Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva is a different machlokas. It's the machlokas between Rabbi and Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, meaning at what point does the bread acquire kedusha saguf? Remember, according to Rebbe, the bread of the kibsei atzeres acquires kedusha saguf at what stage? At the shechita. According to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, the bread does not acquire kedusha saguf until you're completed with the zrika. And so therefore, maybe the machlokas is as follows. The Rebbe Eliezer savar la karebi d'amar shechita mekadsha v'ifsululuhu biyotze. The Rebbe Eliezer says that the bread acquires kedusha saguf immediately after the shechita. So by taking the bread outside, you've pasuled it, and therefore there's a general principle that if something already is pasul, it cannot be stigmatized further with pigul. And that's why Rabbi Eliezer says it can't be stigmatized with pigul. And the Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, da'amar shechita lo mekadsha v'lo mifsala biyotze. So, and Rabbi Akiva, who says that it is subject to the stigma of pigul, holds that, why? Because it didn't yet acquire kedusha saguf until zrika, and at the time of zrika you had a machshav of pigul, and it was already back inside the temple, and therefore, since it doesn't have any prior psul, because by taking something that only has kedusha stamim outside the temple, you haven't pasuled it, it becomes pasul now for the first time, and that's why it's subject to the stigma of pigul. Maybe that's the machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer, and you totally misunderstood it. So the Gemara says, Haimai, Iamart bishlam Rabbi Akiva karebi svirale, do amar shchita mekadsha lahu, hainu dika amar Rabbi Akiva, dekadshi lahu b'shchita, va'as yazrika kava lahu b'pigul. So the Gemara says, no, what you're suggesting is not really acceptable. Because if we understand the way we had originally explained it, that Rabbi Akiva holds like Rebbe, that as soon as you finish the shechita, the bread is vested with kedusha saguf. So that's the reason why, right, that when you do the zrika that is now with a machshava of pigul will also vest the bread with the stigma of pigul. Elai amart ka Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon svirale do amar zvichalo mekadsha zrikas pigul mi mekadsha v'ha'amar Rav Gidol amar Rav zrikas pigul eina mevia lidei meila ve'eina motzia midei meila. He says, but if you're going to tell me that Rabbi Akiva holds like Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, who says that the bread only acquires kedushas haguf at the time of zrika, right? Then how could a machshava of pigul that's done at that moment of zrika stigmatize the bread with pigul? Now, the reason why the Gemara says that that's not possible is because Rav Gidol had made a statement that says that if the kedushas haguf happens simultaneously at the moment when you have a machshava of pigul, pigul cannot set in. Let me just repeat that again, even though I think this is just way over any possibility of someone absorbing this during Daf Yomi. But I will say it again, just in case you have a brilliant mind, right? Because it just takes a lot for this to sink in. Rav Gidl made a statement and he said, if the object acquires kedushas haguf at the very moment when you have the machshava of pigul cannot set into that object. Rav Gidl says that the object has to have kedushas haguf prior to your machshava of pigul, not simultaneous to your machshava of pigul. And if you're going to suggest that Rabbi Akiva subscribes to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, according to him, at what moment does the bread acquire kedushas haguf? At the moment of zrika. According to Rav Gidl, that zrika therefore should not be able to vest the meat or the bread with pigul, because Rav Gidl was quoted as saying, "Zrikas pigul ena mevia lidei meila ve'eno motzia midei meila." He made a statement that said that a zrika that's done with a machshava of pigul cannot bring something to meila, nor can it remove something from meila. Meaning what? Ena mevia lidei meila be'emuri kodshim kalim. If we're dealing with kodshim kalim, where the emurim only acquire kedushas haguf at the moment of zrika, since it only acquires kedushas haguf at the moment that you had the pigul, so it never acquires kedushas haguf, and therefore can never become pigul. Ve'ena motzia midei meila bebasar kodshe kodshim. And it cannot remove something from subjectivity to meila, meaning that it doesn't, the machshava of pigul that you have at zrika, if you're dealing with meat that already had kedushas haguf, since that machshava of pigul is done at the time of zrika, which is supposed to be matir the meat to the kohanim, it does not remove the meila ability from that meat, because the machshava of pigul sort of stigmatizes that meat and makes it no longer edible, and therefore it's still subject to meila. But the first part is what's relevant to our discussion, that according to Rav Gidl, if at the moment that the object is supposed to acquire its kedushas haguf, you have a machshava of pigul, that pigul does not set in, and it never acquires kedushas haguf. So therefore, you can't subscribe to you can't tell me that Rabbi Akiva holds like Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, because then according to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, it would never be subject to pigul in the first place. So the Gemara says, Lavi Tosa the Rav Gidl Amar Rav. So the Gemara says that's not a problem. We don't paskin like Rav Gidl. Rav Gidl was shlugged up. He was rejected. Rav Gidl was rejected, and therefore it's very possible that Rabbi Akiva does hold like Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, that the bread only acquires kedushas haguf at the moment of zrika, like Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon says, and therefore the reason why it's subject to pigul is because this is the first psul that is taking place to the bread, because when it was removed outside the temple, it was not rendered pasul because it didn't yet have kedushas haguf. Okay, woohoo! Okay, let's go on to the next question. This is a little bit simpler. Ba'aminei Rabbi Yirmiyah me Rabbi Zera. Kibsei atzeres sheshachtan lishman va'avad halechem mahu sheyizrak damin shelo lishman lahatir basar bachila. It's not, we're not totally out of the woods, but it's like at least you're able to see some glints of sunshine. So the question is like this. We learned in yesterday's Gemara that according to Rabbi Yochanan, if you shech the kibsei atzeres with the bread present and then you lose the bread, so everything is farfallen and you got to start all over again. Because once you've shechted the kibsei atzeres with this particular set of bread, if you lose the bread, then they're too interconnected, and therefore once you lose the bread, you got to start all over with a new set of sheep, and if you lose the sheep, you got to start off with a new set of bread. So the question is like this. I shechted the kibsei atzeres and I lost the bread. So I got to start all over again with the kibsei atzeres. But what about the meat of this pair of sheep? Could I theoretically do the zrika shelo lishma for the sake of a shlamim, and then allow the kohanim to eat the meat? Right? In other words, give me permission to do that so that at least the kohanim will be allowed to eat the meat of this carbon. Instead of discarding it, let the kohanim eat it. So Amar le yesh lecha davar she'eno kasher lishma v'kasher shelo lishma? Question mark. He says, since when do you ever have a situation where if you do everything according to correct protocol, the meat is pasul, and if you do it according to incorrect protocol, the meat is kosher? that seems counterintuitive, and therefore my initial reaction is to say that it's no good. You can't lichatchila go ahead and do something shelo lishma to permit the kohanim to eat the meat. So v'lo, wait a second, what are you talking about? I can give you an example of that. V'harei pesach kodem chatzos de'eno kasher lishmo v'kasher shelo lishmo. What about if I take a paschal lamb and I shecht it before the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan? I shecht it in the morning of the 14th of Nisan. There's an example. If I did it lishma, it's puzzle because I'm doing it at the wrong time. But if I do it shelo lishma for the sake of a shlomim, it's kosher. So you see that there is a scenario where something that's done shelo lishma is kosher, and when it's done lishma, it's not kosher. So the Gemara says, "But no, hachi ka'amina. Yesh lecha davar shenira lishmo v'nidcha lishmo ve'eno kosher lishmo ve'kosher shelo lishmo." What I really mean to point out to you is that that's not analogous, because that was a scenario where the paschal lamb had never reached its usability as a paschal lamb. And that's why if you did it shelo lishma, it's kosher. But here, the kivsei atzeres already reached their usability as kivsei atzeres, and then they became unusable because the bread was lost. How could it be that at that point would tell you to do something shelo lishma and that it's kosher, and if you were to follow it up with lishma, it would be non-kosher? That we never have a scenario. The Gemara says, but we can find that also. V'lo v'harei pesach achar zmanu b'shar yemos hashana. But what about the paschal lamb, where the 14th in the afternoon already arrived, and I decided not to shecht it, and I waited until the 15th or 16th or January, whatever, the following season or whatever, and I shecht it? In that situation, if I shecht it shelo lishma, it's kosher, and if I shecht it lishma, it's pasul. So once again, that's a scenario where its proper time had already arrived, its usability had already arrived, and I allowed it to lapse and become unusable, and now if I shecht it shelo lishma, it's okay, and if I shecht it lishma, it's not okay. So why isn't that analogous to here? So the Gemara says, no, that's still not analogous, because hachi ka'amina. Yesh lecha davar shenira lishmo v'nishchat lishmo v'nidcha lishmo ve'eno kasher lishmo v'kasher shelo lishmo. The example, really, there's no corresponding example to the following, where a carbon is usable, the animal is usable, and it's shechted for its intended purpose, and then becomes precluded. There, we never have a corresponding example where if I do the subsequent avoda shelo lishma, it's kosher, and if I do the subsequent avoda lishma, it's going to be pasul. Because there you don't find there's no parallel example by Korban Pesach. If I did the Korban Pesach on the 14th in the afternoon, and I do it lishma, if it becomes precluded, there's no possibility of doing it shelo lishma and doing anything afterwards. So that's the argument the Gemara is giving. But the Gemara says, v'lo v'arei toda. But what about a carbon toda? We learned in yesterday's daf also that if a person shechts the carbon toda for the sake of a toda, and then the loaves of bread that are supposed to accompany the toda become crumbled and unusable, you have to redo the carbon toda. But the Gemara had said yesterday that in that situation you can do the zrika for the sake of a shlamim, and the meat is still edible for the person who brought the carbon toda. So why don't you say the same thing over here? If it's done lishma, it's no good, and if it's done shelo lishma, it'll be edible. So the Gemara says no. Shiny toda derachmona karyeh shlamim. So the Gemara concludes no, it's no good over here. By the kivsei atzeres, even if you do the zrika shelo lishma, it's not good. Why is toda different? Because the Torah, in describing a carbon toda, calls it a subset of the carbon shlamim. So therefore, if I shech the carbon toda for the sake of a toda, and then I lose the bread becomes unusable, and then I finish off the avoda, I do the zrika for the sake of a shlamim, I'm still continuing what it was originally started as, which was a carbon shlamim. And that's the reason why the meat is still edible, even though I haven't been yotzei my pledge of a carbon toda. I got to bring another toda, but still I can finish it off as a shlamim because it was always called a type of shlamim. But here, by kivsei atzeres, it's not a type of shlamim. So if I started it off and I shechted it lishma, and then the bread got lost, I can't now do it shelo lishma for the sake of shlamim and expect the meat to be edible to the kohanim. It does not work.
Is Pesach also a subset of shlamim?
No. Carbon Pesach is a special carbon. Tanu Rabbana. Shachat shnei kevasim al arba chalos, Moshe shtay mehen umenifan v'hashar nechalos b'pidyon. The last thing that we're going to see is, and this the Gemara will discuss more thoroughly tomorrow, is that the Brisa states as follows. Continuing our discussion of the Kivsei Atzeres, if I set aside 4 loaves of bread instead of 2 loaves of bread, I obviously have 2 loaves too many. The problem is that I don't know which loaves are the Kivsei, are the Shtei HaLechem, and which loaves are the superfluous loaves. So if I shecht the Kivsei Atzeres over these 4 loaves, so the halacha is, take 2 of them, wave them over the Mizbech, so that you've designated those as the Shtei HaLechem, and v'hashar nechalos b'pidyon, and the remaining 2 loaves only have Kedushas Damim and not Kedushas Aguf. And therefore you can transfer their Kedusha onto coinage, and they become totally chulin, and they're perfectly okay for consumption by anyone. And that's the statement of the Brisa. And tomorrow the Gemara is going to analyze how that works exactly. We'll hold it here for today. Have a wonderful day.